Hey everyone, this is Charlie Sykes. I'm really excited to introduce a brand new member of the Bulwark podcast family, our own Sarah Longwell's Focus Group podcast, because I'm sure you're going to love it. I'm including the first episode in my feed, but you'll be able to listen to all of the future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any other podcast player of your choice. For more information, check out focusgroup.thebulwark.com or follow the links in this episode's description.
If you were going to give advice about how to get your vote, what would it be?
So don't be an asshole.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Focus Group podcast, where we are bringing you behind the two-way glass and discussing what voters are really thinking. I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark, and today I am joined by one of my personal political analyst heroes, Amy Walter, editor of the venerable Cook Political Report. Amy Walter, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
So I want to ask you, just because you have been somebody whose political analysis I'm devoted to, how do you use focus groups in your work?
I have to say, part of the reason I love doing focus groups is you do get to really see voters struggling with the reality of the choices in front of them. And again, you can't get that just in the hard data of a poll. You have to watch them go through it. And from there, you really can understand better the motivations of voters.
But jumping into this group in particular, today we talked to what is, I think, the most coveted, interesting group in politics right now, which is 2016 Trump voters who voted for Joe Biden in 2020. They are the unicorn swing voter, the group that people say doesn't actually exist. And yet in this last election, they basically decided things because they were, it was obviously a high salience election, lots of turnout on both sides. Everyone got every last voter out. At the end of the day, it was these kind of right-leaning, moderate Republicans and independents who had voted for Trump in 2016, who decided to vote for Joe Biden, even as they voted down ticket for Republicans. And so understanding these voters seems like it would be very important for both parties, because to me, these are the people who are up for grabs. Was there anything just that jumped out at you immediately from this group that you thought sort of struck you as an observation?
That these were all folks who didn't dislike Donald Trump in the way that I think some people thought they did. In other words, they found ways to say, look, I like his policies. I like a lot of the things he said when he was running for president in 2016. I really wanted to believe that this business background, this outsider thing was gonna work. I wanted to give it a chance. But, and then this is where it's universal among these types of voters, but his personality, the tweeting, the rhetoric, the non-presidential behavior, I just couldn't do it any longer.
I think that his policies were actually decent. I think when the pandemic hit, I think that just changed everything. Trump really poorly handled it during the pandemic. It was crucial for his rhetoric to be spot on and helping the country, and I think he failed at that.
I at first started off the presidency kind of thinking, well, it doesn't matter what he says, it matters what he does. What is he doing for the economy? What red tape is he lifting for businesses? But then it got to the point where you just saw the bully.
But he went over the top a lot of times, and he also pandered to a lot of his base to try and pit people against each other. I felt like he was starting to lose the trust of the people, and people started to lose faith in, regardless of his policies, if he was going to be able to accomplish anything.
I could not support another term for somebody who is so hateful.
Like when I was a kid, the president was someone that you could look up to, and I just didn't feel like that was who Donald Trump would be for like my kids,
So first of all, I just want to point out, these are Republicans, people who identify more as conservatives. What struck me the most, or my top line, is the fact that these voters could be future former Republicans. They are kind of up for grabs, I think, still in a way, because they make it clear they don't like the character of Donald Trump. They actually are worried sort of about democracy, and they don't like the Republican Party to be in thrall to Donald Trump and to move in a direction of Donald Trump.
This to me has always been the question, right? As you point out, in terms of these being seminal voters going forward, if you like the policy but don't like the personality, can Republicans now just sort of slot in a non-Trumpian candidate and talk about those same policies so that they can win those voters back? They won't turn them off with the tweeting and the other behaviors, or have these voters are just not going to be able to get the kind of candidate they want on the Republican side anymore, and that they're going to be struggling now in elections, trying to figure out if the person that they're going to send to the White House is going to, embrace that same sort of, it's not the rhetoric, the divisiveness, right? The let's pit one side against the other thing that they really, really disliked. And then the other sort of top line was they are losing faith in Biden.
I think with Afghanistan, we're starting the trend downward. It's not like all hope is lost, but I'm really worried about what kind of decisions are being made at the top.
The Afghanistan pullout was a huge disaster that definitely kind of soured things for me. They're going to really hike taxes up on small businesses. Some scary things are happening now.
But I do think that they were struggling with, all right, I'm not so crazy about how Biden has been operating now. As I said, the shine kind of coming off. But man, if you asked me to vote for Donald Trump again in 2024, no way.
If Trump runs again in 24, would anybody consider him?
No,
absolutely
Probably not. No.
Not if he's changed, I consider it, but I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah, with the narcissism that he has, it would most probably be disingenuous, any sort of regret if he showed or expressed it.
I can't do it, right? So I can't vote for Donald Trump in 24. I can't vote for Biden in 24, even though most of them thought he's not going to be able to run. So, it's almost as if these guys recognize they're in this sort of purgatory for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And this is where, to me, I guess, if you're sort of a political operative type, you're like, okay, well, here's the opportunity. Right. The opportunity is like, who's going to go get these voters? And it was interesting because I don't know how to say this, but like, they're just normies, right? They're just like people who are like, I would kind of like my taxes to be lowish, but I also want people to be kind to each other. And I'm sort of the one woman kept describing it. I thought this was nice. It's something she must say, but I've never heard somebody say it.
I have a very red brain and a very blue heart. I would like to see a candidate who is, fiscally conservative, but maybe we'll move a little bit on some of these social issues.
They have kind of this conventional view of the Republican Party that's almost like a hangover from the last 20 years, where they bring up people like Paul Ryan and they talk about kind of the low taxes and the character as though they haven't quite realized that the Republican Party is very different now than it used to be. Right. Does that strike you, this idea of that they're sort of, they haven't caught up quite yet with the current reality of who the party is?
Right. And the sort of anti-corporatism, right? Most of these folks, it seemed like the plurality were from the Atlanta area. So, right, thinking about the growth of suburban Atlanta and how integral that was to Biden's win there and to the Senate wins for Democrats in the 2020 election. And, I'm sure so many of these folks, they came of age in a time when, Republicans were not only the party of lower taxes, but of we're protecting business, right? And we're the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm going to work for Delta, and I'm going to work for Coca-Cola, and that's a good thing, right? Yeah. We like corporations. We think they're good. And now it's like, wait a minute, we're supposed to hate now the corporations and we hate the politicians, but we're gonna wait, what? Right? Like, where do we fit in? Almost, I think a couple of them, Sarah said exactly that. I don't know where I fit in anymore.
Now, I'm confused as a Republican. Who are they? What's the purpose? What's the identity? And the people that speak the loudest are usually the ones that support Trump. And I think I've moved in many ways over to the middle on a lot of these social issues. And the left has gone so far left and the right has gone so far right.
It's becoming even harder to sort of find myself a place in the Republican Party without, drawing connotations. You tell somebody that, you're a Republican and then they automatically think of you as the extreme. So it's like, well, I don't want to associate with that. So do I even consider myself that anymore?
And obviously we're living in a time where you have folks who consider themselves moderate, whether they're center left or center right, saying, I don't have a home. And the only way that I'm choosing my candidate now is based on who is the least awful. And to me, what was interesting was the fact that they were universally upset about the events on January 6th and, condemned leaders, not just Trump, but Republican leaders who were sort of complicit in it.
Trump clearly was an instigator, and it was horrible. It was just like all the wackos heard the calling. And all the mainstream Republicans, like us, we didn't break into the Capitol.
Nothing short of an act of domestic terror, and everybody who didn't speak up to admonish everybody who participated is complicit in their silence.
You can already see the battle lines, right, for winning over these voters in 2022. Democrats say, hey, look, you guys, this Republican that's running, not any different from Trump, supported the January 6th overthrow, or at least won't condemn Trump there. Do we really want the Congress to look more like what Trump sort of developed? And Republicans come in and say, oh, come on, get off it. He's not president anymore. Joe Biden is. This is Joe Biden's economy. This is Joe Biden's COVID problem. This is Joe Biden's inflation. We know, they're just using Trump as a foil.
Yeah, I was tooling around on Twitter this morning and I saw a Terry McAuliffe mailer that is going out, and it looks like something that Glenn Youngkin would send to his base. It's a picture of Glenn Youngkin saying endorsement announcement, and it's a picture of Youngkin with Trump, and it's all of Trump's quotes about how he endorses Youngkin and about how happy Youngkin is to have the endorsement. And it's in very tiny, almost opaque letters. It says, like paid for by Terry McAuliffe. And I'm sure that was mailed to every suburban voter who looks at a guy like Glenn Youngkin and says, oh, this reminds me of the old days, right? This is a business guy and he's going to be, like a normal Republican, and we can move past Trump. And Terry McAuliffe is here to tell you, no, we're going to tie this guy as closely to Trump as possible, because Trump is poison in these suburban districts. It reminds me of a story that somebody told me about Iowa, who sort of knows the Iowa political scene, and how Joni Ernst ran in one part of the state. She was running ads that really highlighted her relationship to Trump and talked about his endorsements. But in the suburbs, Trump was nowhere to be seen. It was all the Democrats want to raise your taxes. They want to do this. And it's always sort of struck me, though, that it's a real problem for Democrats just in general, that in 2022, for a lot of Trump's base, the people who definitely think the election was stolen, Trump's on the ballot for them. But for the Democrats who kind of want to put Trump on the ballot because that's their turnout mechanism, he's not really on the ballot for them.
That's right. And I think in a state like Virginia, this is going to be a really fascinating test, right? Virginia is the kind of place where I think that rhetoric is still effective enough to get a Democrat over the finish line, in part because of how blue the state has become and how toxic Trump is, especially in the northern Virginia suburbs. But go to Atlanta or Dallas or Phoenix, and it's not quite as hardened as it is in Northern Virginia. And is that going to be, one of those things where a voter looks at, fill in the blank Republican candidate says, oh, come on. Donald Trump.
So this is, as I watch these groups, part of what I think about it, because they really don't like Donald Trump. And they say, well, we're going to evaluate each person candidate by candidate. But what happens if we come out of the Republican primaries and the big Senate candidates on the Republican ticket are super Trumpy? Like we've got Herschel Walker, let's say in Georgia. Let's say we've got Josh Mandel in Ohio. The woman running against, I think it's Chewbacca is how you pronounce her name, running against Lisa Murkowski. And then let's say on the Democratic side that the Dems kind of veer into a 2018 kind of place where you get Connor Lamb potentially as the Senate candidate in Pennsylvania. And I don't know who it's going to be in Wisconsin, but let's say they get, a big pro-business or kind of military background Democrat. They kind of do what they did in 2018 with your Mikey Shiros, your Alyssa Slotkins, your Abigail Spanbergers, et cetera. Is it possible that for these types of voters, there's a narrative, just a broad narrative of, oh, wait, the Republican Party has gone full MAGA and kind of lost its mind. One of the things you hear from Republicans all the time is like, I don't like Donald Trump, but the Democrats are crazy. And so is it possible actually that Democrats are able to correct for that a bit with candidates that are not crazy, and Republicans are the ones who find themselves in kind of the Todd Aiken problem in a bunch of places? Is that possible?
Right. It is. And that's what we're all thinking about, right? We're all going back to 2010 where Democrats get creamed. I mean, it's not just like they lost a few seats in the House. 60 plus seats in the House, but still hold the Senate is remarkable. And it was really thanks to these terrible candidates in places like Delaware and Nevada. The other question is, where are we in terms of what those Democratic candidates now have to defend, right? And in 2010, it was Obamacare. We don't know exactly what it's going to be in 2022, but we have to also take really seriously how well those incumbents are able to message who it is they are at a time when it's their party in the White House.
Yeah. It's a total open question. I think one of the things that's interesting looking ahead even more to 2024, listening to this group. So they are, unlike the groups that I do, and I've done a lot actually in the last couple of months of Trump vote, like enthusiastic Trump voters, or actually I didn't even screen for enthusiasm. They're just 2020 Trump voters, but they are on average pretty enthusiastic about Trump, and they think the election was stolen. They think January 6th was no big deal. But these voters are really different when you talk to these kind of swingish voters. They are all vaccinated. They were sort of remarkably kind of pro-vaccine mandate.
Who here agrees with the vaccine mandate?
I do now. Before I was like, let that be your choice, but I see how things are going. And I have family members who are on the fence, and my sister and her family, they just got over it, and I was worried. So I'm all for it now.
At first, I didn't think that people should be made to do it, but now I am on board with it. If it can help get rid of this pandemic that we're in, then I'm all for it.
Well, it kind of makes sense. I can't send my child to public school without getting those forms signed, with all their immunizations. The only difference is this hasn't been out that long and it's a little more controversial, but
generally they think, well, you got to do something to get it under control. And yet they don't like Joe. They don't want to vote for Joe Biden again in 2024.
What if Biden runs in 24?
No way.
Against
No
Trump?
No way. I couldn't. No.
Just if he runs.
He's already senile as it is.
Yeah, he's pretty old.
I don't think he's going to make it. I mean, he's already, honestly, I would not be surprised if Kamala becomes president in the next 2 years.
I think he's too old. They think he has dementia. And I'll say the thing that you pointed out the soundbite about, we think he's being controlled by somebody else. I hear that in every Trump, every 2020 focus group or 2020 Trump voter focus group. They think he's being controlled by the far left. They think he has dementia. They all talk about it in like a clinical ways. But even this group of swing voters didn't want to vote for him again. And then when you ask about Kamala Harris, they don't want to vote for her either.
Yeah, I just don't like her personality. I can't stand all the laughing.
She's kind of disappeared. I haven't heard about her since the election.
They don't want to vote for her either. This is I think about this all the time. Is it possible to give voters someone affirmative that they like? Like, let's say you're the Democrats. Like, would Pete Buttigieg be, because you do hear this actually in the focus groups a lot. People are really tired of old people. They would like somebody younger. Do you think if the future on the left was a Pete Buttigieg kind of neoliberal and the future on the right is Ron DeSantis, who's made sort of slightly in the Trumpy image, who do you think this kind of group would go for?
That's a really great question. You asked that, or the moderator asked that really specifically about thinking about 2024. And one woman brought up DeSantis.
I would have liked to, several months ago, have seen DeSantis, but what he's doing with, the mask stuff in Florida, it's bad.
And then said, yeah, but on the masks thing, he kind of lost me on that, right? The thing that has always interested me about this question is, you look at the 2018 and 2020 turnout, and it was at historic levels, right? Which I don't know that we're going to be able to reach again. And so in my mind, the question is always, well, who are those people who showed up in 2018 who had never voted before? Who are those people who showed up in 2020 who had either never voted before or who, maybe they vote really inconsistently? And whether they come in or out of the process is going to be as important as who the candidates are, right? So Donald Trump clearly brought in a group of people who no other Republican had been able to attract, right? Who didn't look like the kinds of folks in your focus group, those folks who wouldn't really have identified themselves necessarily as Republicans. They probably identified as, outsiders or libertarians or, I hate everybody. But he resonated with them. What happens to those folks? And we saw in 2016 that there was that Bernie Sanders faction, many of whom went and voted third party, right? Like they weren't going to do Hillary Clinton. They just weren't, even when they knew that the potential for Trump winning. And so, there's a Democratic strategist who talks a lot about this idea of, that the old saying that you never cross the same river twice, right? And that elections are similar, right? You don't ever have the same election twice. You never have the same electorate twice. The electorate flows and changes every year. And in that sense, understanding who the voters are that are, both attracted to and repelled by Trump was really important. And that's why throughout 2020, listening to these types of voters was so important, because what you came to recognize was for all the benefits that Trump got for turning out people who had never voted before, he was turning off all those sort of traditional and consistent voters. And he was bringing out a whole group of Democrats who probably wouldn't have voted before. So his all-base strategy was enough to get him 47% of the vote and very close to an electoral college win in 2020. But it's not enough. It's not a majority. This idea of, who are those voters you're going to try to get in and keep in the fold, to me, that's what's fascinating too, is talking to this group that you put together and then talking to new voters.
Yeah, but you just got on something there that I think is as an important a point as anybody can make, which is that they are consistent voters. Mm-hmm. So we have a whole bunch of people, you are right, that Donald Trump brought affirmative people into the electoral process, and he brought a bunch of people who hated him into the electoral process. They're all excited and knew one to vote against him, one to vote for him. And then there are these people who always vote in every election, will probably continue to vote in every election. They view it as their civic duty, but these people really do vote. And so I think this question of who turns out is obviously.
I do too. It's such a great point in this era we're in, where Democrats are doing much worse with sort of blue collar. I guess we're now calling it like the lower education level voters, not just white, but it also we saw some real examples among Latino voters that Trump was attracting non-college Latinos, right? College Latinos voting for Biden, non-college Latinos, they're still overwhelmingly supporting a Democrat, but that's where Trump made serious gains. And traditionally, those were the kind of voters that Democrats would go after, right? They wouldn't show up in a midterm, but they would show up in a presidential. And the people who would show up in a presidential were these kind of voters you had in your focus group, right? Suburban, consistent, higher education, higher engagement. And that's how Republicans would be successful in midterms, right? Because those guys vote always, they're going to be there. And Democrats would have to struggle to get their lower information, lower propensity voters out. Now, those voters, like you put together in that room, they voted for Biden. Some of them voted for Democrats in 2016, 2018, and 2020, right? The last Republican they voted for was Mitt Romney. And so that's why this group is so important in the midterms, because we know that the suburban vote is still going to be important. And the way that Republicans, at least in redistricting, are trying to sort of mitigate for that is, okay, well, let's dilute some of the suburban Atlanta vote with some more rural vote, suburban Dallas with some more rural Texas voters. But to your point, what if that rural vote doesn't turn out? It turned out a lot in 2020, but it didn't turn out for the Republican Senate candidates in the runoffs, right? Those rural voters in Georgia, they stayed home and without Trump on the ballot. So yes, I think we are all desperate to sort of figure out, all right, who is that likely voter, given that Trump is no longer in the White House, and as much as he will be involved in this election, not physically tweeting anymore, not physically being on our television sets from the White House really matters.
Yeah, and allow me to just observe on this point that this is why the election being stolen is such an important narrative for Republicans right now, because they want the Trump, they know that Trump's not on the ballot. And so how do you get people to turn out? Well, you say, well, this was stolen from you last time. You got to come avenge Trump. Like that is how you, when Kevin McCarthy says Liz Cheney was off message and that's why she needed to be moved out of leadership, that's because the message is that the election was stolen. I mean, yes, some of the bills that are passing around voting rights all across the country are voting that are, the Democrats would call voter suppression bills. The Republicans would call, voter integrity bills, but a lot of that is for Republicans. It's a messaging, play. It's about making this idea that the election was stolen. You have to solidify the integrity of the election, keeping that front and center going into 2022, because that's the strategy, is to keep those people hyped up. I don't know if you think that. I think that.
No. I think that's exactly right. And then there's the downside of it, right? Which is, do you keep people motivated by telling them that their vote is going to be stolen? Or do you get the people like we saw in Georgia who said, well, I'm not voting because Trump told me that it's all rigged?
You don't quite know which. It looks like it really did redound to their detriment in Georgia. Although I would say just in the focus groups, I ask people, how excited are you to vote in 22, and the MAGA Republicans are pretty excited. And I bring that up. I'm like, well, wait a minute. If you think this was rigged, and they're like, well, you gotta beat them so bad they can't cheat. That's that. Now, whether at a macro level that happens at a big enough scale, or whether at some point people are just like exhausted by all of it and just don't bother anymore. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Well, this is where your group was important, because if we're going to just say best case scenario for Democrats, that the folks that Trump brought out, who were first time voters, they don't show up again. Okay. Without him on the ballot, but that these types of voters that voted for Biden, if they're consistent voters, if they now are souring on Biden, if there's not a Trump on the ballot, like they're going to come out and they're going to vote for a Republican for Senate or for the House, and, that then puts the onus on Democrats to say, all right, what are we going to do to either, one, try to convince these folks that the Republican is as bad as Trump, or two, let them go, but go and find our surge voters, our voters that turned out in 2018 and 2020, and find other ways to get them motivated with the same messaging. They're going to steal your vote. Look at all these laws. You know what they're trying to do. Jim Crow 2.0. They stormed the Capitol. This is, we're one step away from mayhem and violence. That and you're right. We're getting sort of a sneak preview in the Virginia governor's race of all of this. We're getting a sneak preview in California with the recall. All that message is coming through loud and clear from Democrats that, this Trump wasn't a one-off. His brand is the Republican Party. And your voters in that group noted that, right? The voters who said, I don't know who this party is anymore. I thought I did, but I don't know what it is. It's so this idea, like you can just get them back, like, you sort of rented, as one Democrat said to me, I'm worried that we rented these voters for 2 cycles, but which may be fair, but I think these voters don't see themselves as they convey from one to the next. They're still trying to figure out where they fit in.
I think that's right. And I think this is why I think that, maybe people are kind of like burnt out on politics and they look at 2022 and they don't necessarily see it as like a seminal election. But for me, and you're right, there's that great clip from the woman talking about this, like, who is the Republican Party? What is their identity? But both parties are going to define in 2022 who they are through the candidates that they put up. And this is why I think I disagree, or I don't know if I disagree with you exactly, because you're not, but I think when it's Herschel Walker, and I think when it's Josh Mandel,
I agree.
This is where I think there's just more opportunity. And if Democrats are smart, and they put up these more moderate, listen, just in terms of who else they rented? A bunch of those young people in the cities who were willing to come turn out to vote against Donald Trump, but who a lot of times those urban voters, they don't care. Young people. And so these are the consistent voters. And I think if the Republican Party goes full Trump, full MAGA in this midterm election, that there are specific geographical areas, and those happen to be big Senate fights.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And where I would put Georgia, North Carolina,
Pennsylvania.
These are states that where the president's already weighed in, and potentially to the detriment, right? The full MAGA. Arizona, right? These are big pickup opportunities that are in peril because of to your point, I absolutely agree. I just don't know about a state like Missouri. We talk a lot about the Todd Akin factor, and I've been asking even Democrats, and they're very pessimistic these days about so many things. And I said, well, what if, there were Todd Akin now? 2021, Todd Akin is on the ballot. And they're like, I just think now it wouldn't matter. It's a different world than it was back when, Claire McCaskill was able to win in a state like Missouri. And, we've sort of gone past that. And part of it too is, the ability to muddy the waters. And you heard that from these voters, and I hear it all the time in focus groups, voters who just feel so overwhelmed with information, right? They're getting their uncle, their Facebook feed, the moms in their yoga group, all telling them all this stuff. And then they're watching the news and they're like, I don't know what to think or who to believe. And I just think you can muddy the waters easier now than you could even 6 years ago, 10 years ago, which wasn't Aiken like in 2012? Yeah.
Yeah. And Aiken's thing was, the legitimate rape comment, which sort of torpedoed him. And I do think you're right that part of what happened, right, is that everybody could like zero in on that clip and that became the entire definition of the race. And if you're a Claire McCaskill, who I believe is a pro-life Democrat, or
no, she's pro-choice, but she wasn't like, she was able to sort of be, she was at that point the sort of folksy, right? Like, not, but it wasn't that she was saying, you're right. I'm running as the liberal alternative to Aiken. It was, do you want this crazy person, right?
Yeah. Well,
or do you want me, who may not be you may not like the D after my name, but at least I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Although, I mean, the Greitens, the person who Trump is likely to endorse in that Missouri race. So legitimate rape, very bad comment, whatever. This guy, as I recall, did he tied a woman up in his basement, assaulted her, photographed her, blackmailed her with it, and also was scamming like a veterans charity?
Yes.
So it does seem like there was at least, but this really comes down to the choice that Democrats make, right? Is like, well, go get yourself a pro-life Democrat. Go get yourself somebody who maybe used to be a Republican. I don't know. Find yourself the most moderate Democrat you could find, because in Missouri, and I think, look, Ohio's kind of a slightly different example of this, but I've let Ohio go as the idea that a Democrat's going to win in Ohio. And yet, Josh Mandel, who, by the way, in every focus group I've done, he's the only one with any name ID right now.
Right.
They all think he's like maybe fine. They don't like have like an opinion on him, but at least they've heard of him, which is why I think JD Vance is always trying to compete for the most insane statement, because he's just trying to get his brand and his name ID up there. But you get a Josh Mandel with like a Tim Ryan, who's trying to run as kind of a Sherrod Brown, who, you're right, as you pointed out earlier, is like this dying breed of person a Senate candidate where they're a Democrat in a pretty solidly red state now. I mean, people thought it was on the table in 2020 and Trump won by like 8 or 9 points. But it is possible that if you get people that are super crazy, it's within like, it's worth fighting for maybe, but I still think it's tough. It's kind of out of reach.
But in place, I mean, look, it's a 50-50 Senate. So if Democrats hold on to Georgia and Arizona and Nevada because Republicans put up a flawed candidate or a candidate who MAGA'd themselves so hard, well, there's the Senate, right? Like Democrats can, and if Democrats can use that to their advantage to pick up Pennsylvania, right? Or North Carolina, but Pennsylvania becomes really, and or Wisconsin, those states that not only give Democrats the majority, or help Democrats keep the majority, but expand it by a seat or two.
So there's one clip I want to play. There was like some of the big news this week was, or last week was around the abortion bill in Texas. And when our moderator asked what people thought about that, here's what they said.
I think that is asinine.
Who you're
creepy. That's like 1984, like novel. Like
not a good idea. Show of hands.
Starts.
Not a good idea. Not a good idea.
Good idea.
Not a good idea.
Horrible.
Stephanie, do you think it's horrible? So this is not something anybody wants in their states.
No, absolutely not.
No way.
I used to like Texas. Not anymore.
I found that pretty interesting. I don't know that Democrats are going to be able to make this. I mean, abortion is, unless it's your like single issue, which I think it is for a lot of Republicans. I hear it as one of the number one reasons why a very nice middle-aged woman who thinks Donald Trump is repulsive still votes for him is because she is pro-life. And that's like her main thing. But like for your sort of average secular swing voters, it seems like this could play.
I agree. Listen, I think we've been spending a lot of time talking about what can Democrats do to bring out their base, and they look at this and the potential for a Supreme Court ruling in June of 2022 as you want to motivate those, as you pointed out, like those urban, younger, not paying really a lot of attention to politics people. Here's a great way to be able to do that. And I think you're right. I mean, to me, you say something about abortion, and for so many people, it just is kind of a glaze over. But if you're Democrats and you frame it as this sort of vigilante justice, right? That I'm going to go take in the Uber driver or the school counselor or whoever, and it looks, like something out of dystopian novel. I think that's the kind of stuff where you say, regardless of how you feel about the issue, can we all agree this is not how we should solve it, right? It sure, and again, we just talked about the Virginia governor's race, but that's what they're trying to do on the Democratic side in the Virginia governor's race, right? It starts in Texas. You know what that means. Everybody's going to copycat.
So just before we wrap, one other issue that I thought was pretty interesting that's really different about this group from a sort of from like a Trump 2020 voting group is that when they talk about the issues that are most important to them. Now, in Trump voting groups, the economy also comes up very high and is something that a lot of people will say is their number one issue. And in this group, the economy was the number one issue. But an issue that always comes up in the Trump groups that didn't come up once in any and never does in the Trump to Biden groups is immigration. It's just completely absent. And I think that it's something that is, and it's sometimes though people might say like, well, there's a mess at the border, but they don't want to see immigrants demonized. Like these to me are the voters who are what George W. Bush was really trying to appeal to with his, right. When they were going to do a comprehensive immigration reform, these are the kind of voters who were really there for comprehensive immigration reform. But I think Trump, when he isolated the idea that there was actually a lot of voters who were angry about immigration and would make it their number one issue, he kind of found that was some of his lightning in a bottle. But it always just strikes me as wild, as just a crazy, like some of the main differences you would see are the fact that everyone in this group is vaccinated. They are fine with the vaccine mandates. They don't care about immigration. They mostly care about the economy, and they still harbor fantasies of like Paul Ryan's great return.
They're writing Paul Ryan fanfic right now as we speak. I think it's also been interesting because I've sat in other focus groups these last couple of weeks with either the kinds of voters you put together, the sort of Trump to Biden, or they were like soft Biden supporters, soft Trump supporters in 2020, or they were Democrats that are low propensity Democrats that didn't vote in 2016, or maybe they didn't vote, they voted for the first time in 2018. And what they all talked about and where this conversation and this focus group started was with COVID, right? And the impact it is having on their lives. Are my kids going to be able to go back to school? Am I going to have to cut back my hours? Really, we have to mask again? Should I take this booster, right? So even for vaccinated people, you hear this just sense of pessimism, right? These folks definitely were pessimistic too about Afghanistan, but COVID really was the most sort of salient concern for them. Now, come 2022, will we really have turned the corner? Will we really, be in a better place economically? I mean, theoretically, yes. But, if this election were today, I would say that, for those swing voters, the thing that is frustrating them the most is the fact that we're still in the middle of this COVID thing and that we're still so divided over it, right? Like, even though Trump's gone, we're still having fights on Facebook and between governors and the federal government and between cities and states over who has to wear a mask, who has to get vaccinated. It's that thing to me that really is the sort of thread that connects all these different kind of swing voters. And it's what helped Biden in 2020, right? It's what got him the win in 2020 was, all right, look, I don't know about this guy. I mean, he's kind of old and he's been around too long, but he seems like he'll put competent people around him to handle the one thing we know we care about, and that's getting rid of this stupid virus and trying to unite us around a strategy. And it was working, as these voters in this group noted too. Like, these first few months, it seemed like we were headed in the right direction. And then this summer, it all kind of fell apart.
I couldn't agree with this point anymore. I think that the people say that they're, when you start the focus groups and you say, how do you think things are going in the country? And people are pretty negative, they bring up Afghanistan, but I think that, that's a news of the day thing. I think that has the real political potential to recede as an issue. I don't think people are voting about that, 10 months from now, but on COVID. And I think this is why, actually, I think it's why Biden did the mandate. And why they've decided that 100%. Politically they're going to be okay, because far more people are just like, get this thing done, get it under control. And even though they know they're going to get blasted by some elements of the right for it, they know these types of voters, what's going to matter to them is the economy bouncing back? Is my life back to normal? And that is going to be a much bigger piece of this.
I could not agree with you more. Again, in listening to these voters and so many others, the frustration they have is it seemed like he kind of lost grip, right? That he was sort of letting it go where it was going to go instead of grabbing the reins. And so while even in this group, you had folks struggling outwardly with, I don't love mandates. One woman who was like, I don't want to wear a seatbelt, whatever. But we got to get this under control, right? And so I may not love the precedent it's setting, but it needs to happen. And so I think that the risk reward for Biden on this with these voters is so much more on the reward side than on the risk side. And that, the further along we go, it's going to get even harder for folks who, the anti-mandate and the anti-vax to really, to get the traction.